Rich kids don't learn money doesn't grow on trees. They learn money follows value. At 6 years old, two kids ask for a toy. One hears, "We can't afford that." The other hears, "Interesting. How could we make the money for it?" That's the first crack in the foundation. One child learns that money is about limits, a cold, external barrier they must respect. The other learns that money is a puzzle, a thing to be figured out, engaged with, solved. Same desire, two responses. And from those responses grow two entirely different relationships with money. One rooted in scarcity, one rooted in creation. Language becomes the seed of a mindset. "We're not rich" becomes an identity. "That's not in the budget" becomes a filter for life. Over time, these phrases aren't just facts. They become emotional rules. Kids absorb not just the words, but the energy behind them. Is money discussed with shame or curiosity? With fear or possibility? In wealthy households, the default is rarely no. It's how. Not always yes, not entitlement, but engagement. The child learns that lack isn't a stop sign. It's a signal to think differently. That's the real first lesson the rich pass on. Money responds to value. It follows solutions, creativity, boldness. It's not locked behind someone else's permission. And while many parents try to protect their kids by teaching caution, money doesn't grow on trees. What they unintentionally teach is helplessness. Imagine if just one phrase changed. "We can't afford that" becomes, "Let's talk about how we could." Same situation, entirely different future. Middle-class kids learn to answer questions. Rich kids learn to ask better ones. The difference begins early, not in answers, but in questions. Walk into most homes, and you'll hear the same pattern. "Can I get this? Can I go there? Can I have that?" And the response? A binary. Yes or no. Allowed or not allowed. That's how most children are trained to think, within approval systems. But in wealthy households, the pattern is different. The child asks, "Can I get that?" And the parent doesn't just say yes or no. They pause, redirect. "That's a cool idea. How do you think you could earn the money for it?" It's subtle, but it plants a seed. The idea that the world isn't made of gates and gatekeepers. It's made of systems, and those systems can be navigated. Middle-class kids are taught to wait for permission. Rich kids are taught to create options. One is raised to follow directions. The other is trained to challenge them, not out of rebellion, but out of curiosity. In one home, a child hears, "Get good grades, get a job, keep your head down." In another, they hear, "What would you build if you had $100? What problem could you solve?" The first learns to answer questions, multiple choice, safe, correct. The second learns to ask better ones, open-ended, uncomfortable, creative. That shift isn't about IQ, it's about exposure. Take the example of two 10-year-olds. Both want a new video game. One asks, "Can I have it for my birthday?" The other asks, "Can I sell lemonade this weekend to buy it myself?" In one case, the parent is the only gateway. In the other, the child becomes a participant in the solution. And over time, this pattern hardens. One child becomes an adult who waits for raises, approval, and job offers. The other becomes someone who scans the world for opportunity, who sees unmet needs as invitations, not obstacles. All because the questions changed. And here's the key. Questions shape cognition. When you teach a child to ask, "How can I?" instead of "Can I?" you rewire their brain to become an architect, not an applicant. You give them permission to explore, fail, adjust, and try again. Rich kids aren't born entrepreneurs. They're trained to think like ones. They're taught that money follows problem solvers. and that the most valuable question in the world is, what can I build that others will value? Because when a child learns to ask that, they're not just seeking toys, they're learning how to generate wealth. Rich kids fail early, middle-class kids fear mistakes. At 15, Ethan launched his first business, a small Shopify store selling t-shirts with sarcastic quotes. He spent weeks designing them, setting up the site, running ads. His dad loaned him $200 to get started. By the end of the first month, he had made 3 sales, all to friends. The rest was failure. Ads didn't convert. His site got hacked. He panicked, tried to refund people, and eventually shut it down. That night, he expected a lecture. Instead, his father smiled. Better to lose $200 at 15 than $200,000 at 40. Then he added, "So, what did you learn?" That moment wasn't about money. It was about mindset. And that's what most people never teach their kids. That failure is the tuition for success, not the penalty. In many middle-class homes, the message is simple. Don't mess up. Be careful. Don't waste money. Mistakes are framed as losses, not lessons. And it makes sense. When there's not much margin for error, risk feels dangerous. But this creates a long-term cost. Fear. Fear of experimenting. Fear of stepping outside the script. Fear of trying something without guaranteed success. So the child learns to optimize for approval instead of growth, to avoid risk instead of explore reward. And by the time they're adults, they haven't failed, but they also haven't built. In wealthier families, the rules are different. Mistakes are expected, even encouraged, as long as they happen early, small, and with reflection. A rich kid opens a lemonade stand, forgets to bring change, and ends the day in the red. A parent laughs and helps them track what went wrong. Another tries to flip sneakers online, only to learn what inventory risk means. But instead of being scolded, they're told, that's part of the game. These aren't just stories, they're reps, mental conditioning, a message that says, failure is a form of data. The earlier you collect it, the faster you learn. This creates a radically different adult, one who doesn't freeze when things go wrong, who doesn't avoid challenge, who understands that building wealth requires iteration, that the first version is rarely the final one, and most importantly, someone who knows that money is a resource for experience, not just protection. Rich kids are taught that money isn't just to keep safe, it's to use for leverage, to test, learn, and grow, not wastefully, but intentionally, because each small failure builds the muscle of resilience. And if you teach a child to avoid every financial mistake, you may also teach them to avoid every financial breakthrough. So here's the question. Are you raising someone who fears the fall, or someone who learns how to land? Middle class teaches, get a good job. Rich teach, own your time. At 12, Ava asked her dad why he wasn't stressed like the other parents. He picked her up from school in the middle of the day, never seemed rushed, and didn't wear a company badge. He smiled and said, because I don't work for money, I work for systems that work for me. She didn't fully understand, but the idea stuck. Later, when her friends' parents told them to study hard so you can get a good job, Ava's dad told her something else. Study the game so you never have to work by the hour. That's the core difference. One group teaches survival. The other teaches leverage. Middle-class education focuses on hours. Work harder. Get a raise. Ask for time off. Budget vacations. It creates a mental link. Money shuckers time. But that link becomes a trap, because if you only earn when you show up, your income is capped by your energy. The result? People stay stuck in jobs they hate, not because they're weak, but because they've been trained to trade hours, not build assets. They know how to earn, but not how to escape. And escape isn't laziness, it's freedom. Wealthy families start early with a different message. Money is a tool to buy time, not just stuff. A kid sells candy at school and is told, "How could you scale that?" Another builds a YouTube channel, and the family talks about monetization, brand partnerships, passive views. Not every kid becomes a millionaire. That's not the point. The point is, they're being shown a different equation. Value, X, scale. Freedom. They learn that the goal isn't to work forever. It's to design something that can work without you. And that mindset changes everything. A child who understands systems looks at the world differently. They don't just look for jobs, they look for problems to solve, tools to build, ways to multiply effort. When others say, "What can I do for 20 hours?" they ask, "What can I build once that pays me forever?" That's the shift, from earning to designing, from employment to ownership. It doesn't mean everyone becomes a CEO. It means even if you have a job, you think like an owner. And in a world that rewards scale, thinking this way isn't optional. It's essential. Because in the end, wealth isn't how much you make. It's how little of your time you have to trade to keep it. Rich kids hear investment talk over dinner. Middle-class kids hear worry. Dinner tables are universities. Every evening, without realizing it, children are being taught economics, psychology, and decision-making, not through lectures, but through tone, patterns, and what's considered normal. In some homes, the conversation sounds like, "Don't open that bill, it's late again." "Your uncle just lost his job." "We'll never catch up on this credit card." These aren't just words, they're emotional signals. Money equals stress. Finances mean fear. Kids don't need detailed explanations to absorb that. They feel it. And slowly, their internal map of money is drawn in anxiety ink. But in other homes, dinner sounds different. "That Airbnb property finally broke even this month." "I'm looking at 2 stocks. Which one do you think scales better?" Let's brainstorm names for that app idea you had. It's not that these families never struggle. They just normalize engagement, not avoidance. A teenager hears their parents talking about cash flow, assets, equity, and slowly, it becomes language they understand. Confidence grows, curiosity sharpens, and money becomes something to work with, not fear. It becomes part of life, like health, relationships, or time. Not taboo, just a tool. Imagine 2 14-year-olds. One sits quietly as their parents argue about bills, afraid to ask for movie money. The other hears their dad explain how rental properties generate passive income, and asks if he can build a small business on Etsy. Same age, same world. But one is surviving the present, while the other is experimenting with the future. That's the unspoken advantage. Rich kids don't just have more money, they have more conversations. Early, frequent, strategic. They hear the game played out loud, and over time, they internalize the plays. You don't need a degree to teach this. You need presence, openness, willingness to say, "Here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm learning. Want to think it through with me?" It doesn't matter if you're building a business or just fixing a budget. Letting your child see how you think trains them more than anything you say. Because if every dinner is about lack, they learn to shrink. But if even one meal is about vision, they learn to build. One reads manuals. The other reads mindsets. Books shape beliefs, especially the ones we're told to read. In most middle-class homes, reading is seen as a duty, a path to good grades, test scores, college admission. The books are safe, approved, instructional. How to get a job, how to write a resume, how to pass this SAT. These are manuals, tactical, predictable, designed to create a worker who fits into a system. But in wealthier households, books are something else entirely, not just tools for success, but mirrors for identity. Instead of just how to succeed, kids are reading how to think. mindsets, psychology, negotiation, leverage, failure, risk, scale, not answers, frameworks. At 16, Jake was reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He didn't fully grasp it all, but one line stuck. Don't work for money, make money work for you. That year, he started reselling sneakers. By 18, he was using ChatGPT prompts to help local businesses with content. None of this was assigned in school. It came from exposure. His friend Kevin, meanwhile, was buried in test prep and worried about which college would guarantee him a job. Kevin's reading list, How to Get into Stanford, 101 Scholarship Strategies, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. Helpful, yes, but all focused on compliance, not creation. Jake was building, Kevin was preparing, and that gap only widened. The difference isn't in intelligence, it's in inputs. If all a child reads are instructions, they learn to wait for direction. But if they read stories of possibility, biographies of creators, breakdowns of deals, lessons from failure, they begin to internalize agency. The idea that wealth isn't found, it's formed. That mistakes are part of mastery. That discomfort is fuel. Wealthy parents hand their kids books on power, strategy, thinking in bets, emotional intelligence, storytelling, persuasion, because they know money flows to those who understand people, not just rules. And here's the deeper layer. The rich don't just assign these books, they discuss them. What did you think of that chapter? How would you apply it? Would you do it differently? Reading becomes reflection, dialogue, a thinking exercise, not homework. That's what makes the lesson stick. So the next time you give a book to a teenager, ask yourself, is this teaching them how to follow or how to build? Kids don't need a lecture to learn about money. They just need a room with tension. A sigh when the credit card is declined. A fight over rent whispered behind closed doors. A panicked glance at a receipt. Silence when the bills come in. These aren't lessons. They're imprints. Emotional blueprints passed down without a word. You think your child isn't watching? They are. Not your bank balance, your body language. And over time, they absorb the message. Money is danger, not opportunity, not strategy. Just something that tightens the chest and shortens the breath. In many households, parents work hard to shield their children from financial stress. They avoid the topic altogether. But absence doesn't equal safety. In fact, the lack of conversation becomes its own signal. When money is never talked about, it becomes a shadow, something mysterious, heavy, off limits. Kids grow up confused, knowing money is important, but not knowing how to relate to it. So they copy behaviors instead. A mom who spends impulsively after a bad day teaches that money is emotional medicine. A dad who hoards every dollar in fear teaches that money is to be protected, not used. Neither parent may ever speak the lesson, but the child still learns. Take Lily. Her father never spoke about finances, but every time she asked for something, he tensed up, not angrily, just quietly, like she'd touched an open wound. By adulthood, she had a great salary, and a deep belief that spending was guilt. Every purchase came with anxiety. Every moment of abundance felt like betrayal. Not because anyone told her that, because she inherited his nervous system. That's what we don't realize. Financial trauma is often multi-generational, passed not through words, but wounds. The rich understand this differently. They know their energy around money is as important as their strategies. They involve their kids in small decisions early, setting budgets for vacations, talking through trade-offs, analyzing investments together. Not to burden them, but to normalize it, to replace fear with fluency. Because the most dangerous thing isn't teaching the wrong information, it's teaching fear by accident. And the only way to change that isn't perfection. It's presence, honesty, curiosity, letting your child see that money is something to learn with, not hide from. Legacy is a strange thing. We think it's a number on a bank statement, a trust fund, a will. But long after the money is spent, or lost, what remains is perspective. The mental blueprint a child carries into every financial decision for the rest of their life. Not what to spend on, but how to think. Not what job to take, but how to evaluate opportunity. Not just how to make money, but what money is for. That's the real inheritance. And most of us don't even know we're giving it away every day, in the way we speak, act, react. Imagine two kids, both age 30. One stands at a car dealership, calculating if she can afford the monthly payment. She remembers her parents saying, "If you can make the payment, you can buy it." That's what she learned. The other walks away from the same car, not because she can't afford it, but because she remembers her dad once saying, "If it doesn't make you freer, it's not an asset." That small sentence, said years ago at dinner, reshaped her filter for life. One phrase became a compass, and it cost nothing, just awareness. You don't need to be rich to teach rich. You don't need $1 million in the bank to raise a kid who understands leverage, value, patience, possibility. You need to be awake. Awake to your tone, your defaults, your tension. Awake to what you reward and what you fear. Because in the end, money isn't just about wealth. It's about who you become in its presence. And that's the real legacy. A child who can stand in front of a big decision and ask, "What would someone free do right now?" If they can answer that, they already have more than money could ever give them.